Today, I'm sharing with you 6 key longevity lessons that don't require quitting your full-time job or taking 74 supplements per day. When you look at social media's conversation around longevity and even some of the so-called researchers in the space, there's conflicting information and also some extreme information when people aren't even mastering the basics that are going to move the needle the most when it comes to their health. What's up and welcome to Sam Miller Science, where you're joining me just over a decade into my personal journey of working to bridge the gap between metabolism, macros, muscle, and medicine, all while helping coaches scale the impact that they desire and deserve. If you are here, thank you so much for listening and for trusting me to help you elevate your coaching game or to lead you in your transformation to realize your true potential. In either case, each week I'll be sharing my methods, models, and message to serve as leverage for your specific goals. Without further ado, let's get on to today's show. I wanted to create this episode in honor of my mom's recent passing and the fact that so many people aren't even doing these 6 core things related to their health that would give them key insights, shift both their cellular and metabolic health, extend longevity, and also their health span, because living longer, if we're not also enhancing that quality of life, simply isn't going to cut it. Most people want to be able to be active and enjoy their life into their later years. So inside today's list, I'm going to share some things that we can do to test and assess our current health and know where we stand when it comes to the overall longevity picture. We'll talk about some basic activities and things that everyone should be doing, regardless of, if you're trying to just be healthy with your kids, or if you're someone who wants to step on stage, compete in bodybuilding, or perform at the highest level. There are some basic habits and behaviors that I think are non-negotiable in our conversation around health. So first, I want to kick it off with a conversation around labs and health testing, because so many individuals maybe go to the doctor and think that they're getting the insights that they need, but really it's only scratching the surface. Maybe they're just getting a complete blood count and a comprehensive metabolic panel. And even though it has the word comprehensive in it, it still may be missing some very important insights for you when it comes to cardiovascular health, predictive risk of other chronic illness or diseases. And so we want to take that a little bit deeper. Now, if you're interested in things like labs and biochemistry and going a little bit deeper, I do have some additional episodes here in the feed in this podcast on Sam Miller Science, talking about 5 overrated or underrated lab markers and different things that we can be doing to have more of a complete picture when it comes to health. Now, I'm just going to focus on a few today that I think everyone should be asking for, and even why some companies like insurance companies are even using this to assess your health when you're not even in the conversation. So the first is going to be C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation and can help to be indicative of how are we taking care of our body, how's our nutrition and training and overall health status being reflected in terms of current levels of inflammation in the body. Now, CRP doesn't necessarily tell you where the inflammation is, but it's still important nonetheless and can help you stay ahead of the curve in preventing chronic disease and illness. Now, the next one is going to be GGT. GGT, I think, is super underrated, and there's companies that even use this to evaluate your health when determining whether or not you're a good candidate for life insurance. So if someone's maybe a smoker or has other habits that are impacting their health, maybe drinking or poor quality diet, standard American diet, their GGT will make them someone who's less likely to get those good insurance premiums. So if life insurance companies are using this to evaluate your risk of death, you should be using it to evaluate your health, right? And have an understanding of where you stand. And even being able to do this and adding this is not a super expensive marker. A lot of people only think of this in terms of liver health, but it can lead to just sharing some great insights. And I think what we're seeing now as more and more research is emerging is someone with better GGT levels may even be able to better withstand, a bout with a chronic illness or something like cancer, or maybe even less likely to have certain chronic diseases in the first place. Fasting insulin is also going to be a very important one, even if you're someone who's not pre-diabetic or concerned about a family history of diabetes, because fasting insulin is going to show how we're responding to our current nutrition and are we eating both appropriate amounts and food sources that are allowing us to regulate our blood sugar. When we don't regulate that blood sugar and have glycemic dysregulation over time, that can contribute to endothelial dysfunction and inflammation in the body. So fasting insulin is one that we want to monitor, even if you're someone who maybe has quote unquote normal fasting glucose or A1C. A1C can be a little bit of a lagging indicator as it's more of like a 90-day marker, whereas fasting insulin
can be great to add in. And it's a super affordable marker too. It's not something that's very, very expensive, and we can add it to these panels to check that out. Now, if you're someone with a cardiovascular history and you're concerned about different family risk factors as well as personal risk factors, maybe based on your diet in the past, previous behaviors, I'm always a big fan of asking for it, including ApoB and Lp(a). This just goes layers beyond the typical HDL, LDL, and triglycerides conversation. So doing this can give you a more complete picture of your cardiovascular health. Some people will even take that next step and get a coronary calcium score, which is indicative of plaque development in terms of your arteries. So if you're concerned about cardiovascular health, and that's one of the biggest things you want to focus on in terms of your overall longevity and different risk factors, consider those 2 to 3 things. Now, a coronary calcium score is not necessarily blood work. You would need to go to an actual facility to have this done. It's not something that, like a LabCorp request is going to do for you or a phlebotomist is going to do. You would need to go and have that scan done. Now, moving out of just the overall tests and assessments and things we can do to get a pulse on our health currently. And again, if you're someone who's very fascinated by the idea of health testing, I have specific episodes on that, things like comparing serum labs to the Dutch test when it comes to our health, which one's going to be more relevant for your situation and which has maybe a larger evidence base. I have overrated and underrated lab markers, so definitely check those out. And then on social media, I've previously shared some infographics on those things as well. But for today, I want to make sure we get through this full list of our 6 things in honor. That's my mom's favorite number. So we're going through all 6 in terms of things you should be doing in terms of optimizing your health, maximizing your chance at the most longevity possible. So this one gets talked about a lot, and it's been popular in recent years because there's been the anti-fragility narrative and strength training, preserving muscle mass, but strength training has to go on this list, not only because it contributes to insulin sensitivity, but as we age and we have increased fall risk or potential situations where if someone's trying to continue to live on their own and be autonomous at an advanced age, having a strong strength base is going to help that, right? And I think strength training also teaches things, not just the physical characteristics of strength training, but learning to strength train earlier on, building confidence and learning to do those things yourself, I think can pay dividends later in life. And we certainly have a large amount of data to support the fact that strength training can contribute to our health positively, accruing muscle mass, reducing sarcopenia and osteoporosis, especially in women. Women who strength train are able to retain more muscle and bone density versus those who do not. So if you are not strength training, and this is something that I definitely wish if 20, 30, 40 years ago, someone could have tapped my mom on the shoulder and got her strength training, even if it was 2 days per week, I think that could have been a really big addition to her overall health routines. So strength training does not have to be crazy, right? It could be you're starting with dumbbells. You could be starting with some machines. You don't need to be doing Olympic lifting with barbells or CrossFit for this to count in terms of your health. And I think some people are discouraged when it comes to strength training, but you can build that momentum, start to build your strength and confidence. It goes a really long way for both men and women as they age, but always better to start. Really no better time to start than the present. I think the old adage is the best time to plant a tree was like 20 years ago, but if we can't do that and can't go back in time, hindsight's 2020, might as well plan it today. So strength training, if it's not on the horizon for you for 2026, maybe consider that. Now, a lot of people who listen to this show are health and fitness coaches or have a personal training background. They're trying to get more people to strength train, share this, get this out in the world and encourage more people to do it. And it's not as scary or even difficult as people may think it is. You might be surprised and actually impress yourself with your ability to successfully strength train. The next thing, and this might surprise you in terms of my overall list and where I've put it. Now, these aren't necessarily in chronological order of things that you should do, and they're not necessarily all of equal importance here, but this one I think is very important. It's something I consistently had to have conversations with my family about, not just growing up, but especially now as someone who has had a career as a health professional over the last 18 years, is liquid calories. And I don't necessarily just mean alcohol, but people who are still consuming soft drinks or soda and allowing that to contribute to additional calories day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year. when you make the simple substitution of removing those liquid calories, it can help to maintain a healthier weight and improve body composition versus someone who's constantly consuming those liquid calories on top of their solid food intake. So when I see this happening, people are consuming liquid calories and maybe not necessarily making the best food choices. And we'll talk a little bit about protein intake as we move through the show. Those liquid calories don't necessarily come with, micronutrients and antioxidants. And for most people, we're not talking about things like, a fruit-based smoothie or something like that. Most people, when they're consuming liquid calories, it's typically going to be from soda or alcohol. And so minimizing that, mitigating it, or substituting something that's not going to be as rich from a calorie perspective and sugar perspective. And I'm not necessarily speaking to any one particular ingredient there, right? Both of those things are going to drive calories up and overall consumption up. And they're not necessarily things that are bringing the best prepackaged instructions for our metabolism versus if we're thinking about something like we eat a high protein food or single ingredient whole foods, coming with that whole food matrix, antioxidants, polyphenols, or essential amino acids or fatty acids. There's things that are going to contribute from a nutrition or nourishment perspective, not just providing calories. So liquid calories is on my list, and it's because I consistently had to have the conversation with my mom about drinking full calorie Pepsi or other sodas throughout her life. And I think it's something that could have led to improved markers, not only, in terms of her internal health and blood work, but she probably would have felt better too in terms of her energy levels and ability to regulate her blood sugar. The next thing we're going to talk about is that protein intake. So protein intake is great, not only because of its ability to preserve muscle and help to build lean muscle, but we also see that it displaces some of those less healthy choices, right? So if you think of the idea of displacement, if you go rewind to like high school science class, and if you were to drop something in a body of water, the thing that you drop may displace some of that liquid. And so when you think about the idea of displacement from a nutritional perspective, protein can buffer against other food choices. So when people are satiated and they've had, enough food to eat, they're not walking around like a hungry hippo waiting for the next snack or reaching for the next thing. That's not necessarily the most nutritious choice. So I love protein not only because of the fact that it's providing those essential amino acids, but one thing I talk about in my book, Metabolism Made Simple, is that protein helps to manage appetite and maximize adherence. And those are two key ingredients of any successful nutritional strategy that can help us to maintain a diet over the long haul or maintain, an eating style over the long haul. It doesn't have to be a particular diet, but it's going to help you stick with it versus someone who's constantly hungry, constantly experiencing those cravings between meals. So protein intake is going to be very important. And in the age of GLP-1s, right, we see these powerful peptides that have come to market. People are going to need to be mindful of that protein intake to preserve skeletal muscle mass and not experience too much muscle wasting. Because if we don't have that adequate protein intake in strength training, we do see that individuals can lose muscle mass in those situations. The next one, I'm going to move back to more of physical activity, and this is just walking. So as far as I can remember, when my mom was at her healthiest is actually when she was doing the most walking, whether it was socially with friends, personally as a form of exercise, or just getting outside. But I remember for a period of time when I was younger, my mom was one of those mall walkers, and she would get out there and she would meet a friend or, go for a walk or meet at a park or something like that. And that walking and excess activity, especially if someone has a relatively sedentary lifestyle, can move the needle with our health in so many ways. We see that walking can be great for digestion, improving motility and our gut health, and it has the ability, especially when we walk in a post-meal setting, helping with that postprandial glucose regulation. So if it's someone who does maybe struggle with their blood sugar, or we're looking to improve that fasting insulin level that I discussed a little bit earlier in the episode, walking is going to be one of the best ways to do that, get that under control. And it can be just little tiny movement snacks or walks after a meal, even if it's 5 to 10 minutes. If you want to build up to taking a longer 40 to 60 minute walk each day, that's fantastic. But don't downplay, the magnificent effects of a 10-minute walk. I think a lot of people kind of look at walking and it's like, oh, that's silly. I have to do, all of this formal exercise to achieve my goals. But sometimes a mix of, a slight dose of strength training throughout your week with some walking can go, I think, will take you further to your goals than most people think, right? Whereas a lot of people, especially this time of year that I'm recording this podcast, and people are thinking about new goals related to exercise, nutrition, and fitness for the new year, they want to take these extreme approaches, and they haven't necessarily tried something like strength training 3 times a week and walking every day. So I think most people can ride that out to some pretty tremendous results that might actually surprise them. Now, if you want to scale that and get in some, zone 2 cardio, or you decide you want to get into running, or you're going to add biking on top of that, or hiking on top of that, or something that's going to be a little bit more of a challenge from a cardiovascular perspective, cool, you do you. I'm just speaking from the fact of, from the general population and looking at the state of the Western world and the society in the United States. Most people are metabolically unhealthy and could really stand to benefit from these basic strategies. And also because they're not extreme, because they don't, walking doesn't necessarily cause a tremendous amount of soreness or anything in the average person, they'd be more likely to stick with it for the long term, versus how many times do you see someone start running, in spring or summer, and after a couple weeks or a few months, they've completely fallen off the wagon, right? So I'm not anti, other forms of cardiovascular exercise or activity. Walking is just a great way, something that is very accessible and people can sprinkle in. Although having a more intense form of training can certainly be beneficial. And especially if someone is working with a coach, and maybe you're a health and fitness professional listening to this, that's where you're going to come in terms of providing that successful guidance and instruction around some of those more advanced activities. Next thing we're going to touch on is sleep. Could not have a list about longevity without the importance of sleep. Now, it's interesting because not only is sleep supportive of health in terms of helping to modulate inflammation and improve insulin sensitivity, but we see the consequences of lack of sleep in night shift workers. So if you were to look at observational research, right, because it's not super ethical to deprive humans of sleep in a randomized controlled trial, knowing that it has ill health effects, and push that person through that for an extended 5, 10, 15, 20-year period of time, we can't really do that because that's unethical. That would not be ethical research, right? So we have observational studies, and what tends to happen when individuals work the majority night shifts, especially at a younger age or for a very prolonged period of time, where there's a very large volume of evenings worked over the course of a career, that can impact things like cancer risk and the development of other chronic illnesses and conditions and different things that may lead to various causes of death. So we know not only that sleep is healthy, but a lack of it can be very detrimental when it comes to our metabolic health and longevity. So if you're someone who's looking to check everything off on this list, and a lot of the folks who listen to me are, maybe a health professional, or what I would consider to be an enthusiast with their health, and they're doing a lot of these things already, you should feel good if you are checking the boxes on these 6 things. Now, what needs to be emphasized is with all of the different extreme longevity approaches or things that have gained a lot of traction, and it's not to say that, if you want to pursue a little bit of time restricted eating or something, that doesn't necessarily need to be done in an extreme way. If you want to increase your supplementation and you have the discretionary income to do so, that's not necessarily extreme. Or if you want to strength train a little bit more than what I referenced in the episode, that's great. I personally prefer to strength train 4 or 5 times, not 2 or 3 times. That's what works best for me. I enjoy it. And it's obviously a habit that I've cemented over the years, but it's just to understand that if we're not doing these 4, 5, 6 things, and we're just grasping at straws through these various tips and strategies and promotional materials on social media, we're missing a lot of low-hanging fruit when it comes to our health and longevity. I think it creates confusion for folks, especially the average person. So when I think about my mom and her health and all the things she's seen over the years in terms of magazines and different diets and all of the various nutritional conversations on morning talk shows and TV, it's a lot of chatter, right? Versus the things that are going to move the needle the most, which is understanding where you stand in terms of your internal health, getting that health testing and blood work done, adding some more specific markers that we have good research to support the fact that those can be indicative of your current state of health, or potentially either related to or somewhat predictive to certain types of illness or chronic disease. Strength training, I think, is one of those things that most of the people listening to this are probably nodding their heads. Universal agreement, if you made it this far, that can be a great addition to any wellness routine. Liquid calories, whether you are someone who understands and you've seen the consequence of alcohol in a transformation, or you're someone who's seen individuals who cut out very sugary, high calorie drinks, that can have a massive impact because it's creating an instant shift in terms of energy intake and allows them to actually eat more nutritious whole foods and still probably stay under a certain calorie threshold if they need to. So even if you're more of a food quality person versus just solely tracking, macros or anything like that, that substitution, you're adding things like micronutrients or protein or potentially other forms of carbohydrate besides the liquid carbohydrate, can certainly have some benefits there as well. Now, protein intake, we talked about the displacement feature, as well as the fact that many people need more protein. We need those essential amino acids for muscle building and recovery, especially if we're engaging in strength training, which appeared earlier in this list. Walking, kind of a no-brainer and probably the most accessible form of movement for most people. And then we have sleep, something that everybody should work to prioritize. And in today's modern world with technology and constantly, having access to things like social media, or you have your television in your home, there's so many things that distract people from actually getting to sleep on time. When prioritizing this can be one of the best things that you do for your health. If you enjoyed this list, if you have a friend, a family member, a client who would benefit from hearing this list, or they just need to hear it from someone besides you, because I know for me, if someone would have told my mom this long before I was born, it probably would have been super beneficial for her health. We all know that sometimes family members and friends can have a little bit of proximity bias when it comes to these things. So a little bit of content here and there, or coaching from another perspective or another party, can potentially help everyone to still get along, but also get the information that they need to live a long and healthy life. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up so other folks know that this show is worth listening to. You can also subscribe so you never miss an episode. That's true for the video and the audio feeds. As always, I appreciate you guys hanging with me throughout today's episode, and I will talk to you in the next show. Now, the items that I've shared with you today certainly aren't the only things that matter for health and longevity, quality of life, wellness, and health span. It's not an exhaustive list. We could have gotten more in depth on things like micronutrient status. You could make the argument that things like loneliness contribute to all-cause mortality. And there's even some studies that suggest that loneliness is as bad as smoking. So we know community is important. The idea of family or friendships, adding in the idea of sense of purpose or ikigai is very important. And we see in some cultures that contributes to improved health outcomes even at more advanced ages. So could we add to this list? Certainly, but I think it'd be hard to argue with the fact that the kind of 4 to 6 core things that I've shared with you today are paramount when it comes to health and longevity. Even if you want to add some of the extra stuff on top or have some of these other conversations around emotional health, spirituality, and other dimensions of wellness that would fit into this conversation in terms of someone's overall health and longevity.